At 63, Darnell Carter had mastered the art of invisibility, a black veteran who mentored troubled teens, tended his garden, and kept his nightmares to himself. But when government agents stormed his home and tased his wife Angela before his eyes, invisibility was no longer an option. "I have the Omega file," he stated, 5 words that transformed a violent raid into a hasty retreat. In that moment, the quiet gardener with a cane revealed himself as something far more dangerous. To Power, a keeper of buried truths. The USB drive hidden beneath his floorboards didn't just document forgotten war crimes. It exposed an active shadow program of human experimentation that would soon bring America's most untouchable institutions to their knees. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today, and if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow's special episode is one you definitely don't want to miss. Ordinary lives, extraordinary truths, waiting to surface. Morning sunlight filtered through the bedroom blinds, casting warm stripes across Darnell Carter's weathered face. At 63, his body remembered the exact time to wake without an alarm. He eased himself up, careful not to disturb Angela, still sleeping peacefully beside him. The old knee injury from his final tour ached as it did most mornings, but Darnell had learned to greet pain like an old acquaintance, acknowledge it, then move on. His worn slippers waited by the bedside, positioned exactly where he'd left them the night before. Order and routine. They'd been his salvation after returning home 2 decades ago. In the kitchen, Darnell filled the coffee maker and watched the morning light spread across his backyard garden. The tomatoes were coming in nicely this season. While the coffee brewed, he slipped out the back door to feel the earth between his fingers. The garden had been Angela's idea after his 3rd night terror, back when sleep seemed like a battlefield he couldn't escape. "Talk to the soil," she'd said. "It listens better than any therapist." She'd been right, as she usually was. Darnell hummed, "A change is gonna come," under his breath as he checked his vegetables, the Sam Cooke classic flowing naturally from somewhere deep in his memory. The rhythm helped his hands work steady, pinching off dead leaves and testing the soil moisture. "There you are," Angela's voice called from the back porch. "Starting without me again?" Darnell turned to see his wife of 38 years, wrapped in her faded blue robe, hair still untamed from sleep. At 61, Angela Carter carried herself with the same quiet dignity she'd had when they'd met at a veterans support rally back in '86. Her eyes still lit up when she smiled, his own personal sunrise. "Just saying good morning to the tomatoes," he replied, wiping his hands on his pants. "Coffee's ready." Inside, Angela moved with practiced efficiency, pulling eggs and peppers from the refrigerator while her phone played the latest episode of Veterans Forward, a podcast on PTSD reform. Darnell settled at the kitchen table watching her work. "Senator Thompson's pushing for expanded coverage for non-combat trauma," Angela said, nodding toward her phone. "Says the old definitions don't account for what support personnel witness." "About time," Darnell muttered. "Shouldn't matter if you're holding a gun or a clipboard. What you see stays with you just the same." Breakfast between them was a comfortable dance of 38 years, Angela talking about her plans for her wellness group, Darnell nodding and occasionally offering a thought. The small details of ordinary lives unfolding as they had countless mornings before. After dishes were cleared, they walked to the rec center 5 blocks away. Their neighborhood wasn't what most would call affluent, but it had heart. Neighbors waved from porches, children stopped their games to call out greetings to Mr. and Mrs. C. "Morning, Mrs. Carter. Those brownies last week were fire," called 12-year-old Jasmine from her front yard. "Glad you enjoyed them, sweetie," Angela called back with a warm smile. At the rec center, they parted ways with a quick kiss. Angela headed to the East Wing where her wellness circle for trauma survivors would gather, while Darnell made his way to the community room where both troubled teens and fellow veterans awaited his mentorship. The teens arrived first, 4 boys from the neighborhood who'd been mandated to community service after minor offenses. Darnell had seen too many kids like them end up in systems designed to punish rather than heal. He'd made it his mission to intercept as many as he could. Andre Williams arrived last as usual, his tall frame filling the doorway. At 17, Andre carried himself with a quiet intensity that reminded Darnell of himself at that age. "Sorry I'm late, Mr. C," Andre said, placing his ever-present camera bag carefully beside his chair. "Mom's car wouldn't start." "You're here. Now," Darnell said simply. No judgment, no lecture, just acknowledgement. The session focused on conflict resolution, with Darnell guiding them through scenarios they might face. Andre was filming parts of it. He'd been recording interviews with local veterans for months now, building what he called a living history project. Later, when the veterans arrived, men and women who'd served in conflicts from Vietnam to Afghanistan, Darnell shifted from mentor to peer. Here, he was just another soldier trying to make sense of peace after war. After the sessions, Darnell and Angela walked home together, the afternoon sun warming their backs. "I think Marissa might finally be ready to talk about what happened," Angela said, referring to a woman in her trauma group. "She stayed after today, asked if we could get coffee." Darnell nodded, understanding the significance. Angela had been working with Marissa for months. "That's good. Small steps." Angela's pace slowed suddenly. "That black SUV is back," she said quietly, nodding toward a vehicle parked halfway down their block. Darnell followed her gaze. The SUV sat with tinted windows, engine off but presence. "Unmistakable. Probably nothing," he said, squeezing her hand reassuringly. "Could be new neighbors, visiting someone." "It's been there 3 days in a row, Darnell. Same spot. Nobody gets out, nobody comes to it." He offered a half smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Now who's the one seeing threats everywhere? Inside their home, Angela busied herself with dinner preparations while Darnell retreated to his small home office. Once alone, his casual demeanor fell away. He pulled up the security camera footage from the past week, scanning for the SUV. There it was, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, always at the same time, always staying. For exactly 47 minutes, a chill settled in Darnell's stomach. Coincidences didn't follow schedules. That evening, while Angela read in bed, Darnell claimed he needed milk for morning coffee and drove to Lou's Diner on the edge of town. In the back booth waited Martin Geller, a civil rights attorney he'd known for years. "You're looking well, Darnell," Martin said, though his eyes told a different story. "Cut to it, Martin. What's happening?" Martin slid a folder across the table. "Your name is showing up on watch lists. That veterans class action you helped organize, it's making waves in places that don't like ripples." Darnell opened the folder, scanning documents with highlighted sections about individuals of interest and potential domestic disruption. "This about the experimental drug trials?" Martin nodded. "The Department of Defense doesn't appreciate being sued by the men they used as lab rats, especially when those men are starting to organize. We're just seeking acknowledgement, Martin. Medical coverage for the side effects." "You're seeking accountability," Martin corrected. "That's always more dangerous." He took back the folder. "Watch yourself. There's movement around your file." The next day, Andre came by the house, eager to show Darnell his latest interview. "Edits. I got Mr. Wilson to finally talk about Fallujah," Andre said, excitement making his words tumble over each other. He brought out his medals and everything. They sat on the porch watching the footage on Andre's laptop. The boy had a natural talent for drawing out stories people had kept buried for decades. "You've got a gift," Darnell said, patting Andre's shoulder. "You listen without pushing." "I learned from you, Mr. C," Andre replied, his voice suddenly serious. "When most adults look at us, they see problems to fix. You just see people." The moment was interrupted by a patrol car slowly cruising past the house. Officer Sarah Klein sat behind the wheel, her eyes briefly meeting Darnell's before she drove on. Later that afternoon, at the precinct, Sarah Klein stared at the envelope that had appeared on her desk. No sender, no official stamp, just her, name and confidential marked in red. Inside was a photo of Darnell Carter and a single-page profile labeled, "Possible Domestic Threat. Observe and Report." Sarah had known Darnell for years. He volunteered at the same community events where officers did outreach. He'd helped her nephew get straight after a rough patch. The idea of him as a threat felt wrong in her bones. But orders were orders. She tucked the envelope into her desk drawer, unsettled, but duty-bound. Meanwhile, Angela sat frustrated at her computer, staring at an empty screen where her nonprofit records should be. 5 years of data, donor information, program results, grant applications, all gone. "I don't understand," she told the tech support voice on the phone. "I had cloud backup. How can everything just vanish?" "Ma'am, according to our logs, the data was deleted locally from your computer," the technician explained. "All copies, including backups, were systematically removed over the course of 2 hours last night." "That's impossible. I was asleep, and nobody has my passwords." "Someone with professional skills would know how to bypass those protections," he said carefully. "Have you considered filing a police report?" After hanging up, Angela stood at the window, watching the street with new eyes. Something wasn't right. She and Darnell had lived quiet, purposeful lives helping their community. Why would anyone target them now? That night, Darnell thrashed in his sleep, caught in a dream that was actually a memory. Desert heat. The convoy stopped. Gunfire. His unit was supposed to be backup for a routine patrol, but they'd stumbled onto something else entirely. Private contractors in unmarked gear, civilians lined up, executions. A commander grabbing a laptop before. The bodies were cold. Darnell had copied the files quickly, buried the USB drive in the sand beneath a distinctive rock formation, marking the GPS coordinates in a coded note. His hands had been shaking, but his mind was clear. If he died, someone would need to know. He woke with a gasp. Angela's hands on his shoulders, her voice pulling him back to the present. "Same dream?" she asked, her eyes full of concern in the darkness. "Not a dream," he whispered. "Never was." The next morning, a man in a city worker's uniform knocked on their door, clipboard in hand. "Routine code inspection," he announced when Darnell answered. "We've had reports of possible zoning violations in this area." Darnell studied the man's face, noting the lack of city insignia on his truck, the 2 new boots, the way his eyes scanned. The interior of the house with practiced efficiency. "I wasn't aware of any violations," Darnell said calmly, blocking the doorway with his body. "That's why I'm here to check," the man replied with a smile that never touched his eyes. "Wouldn't want any problems for you folks." Darnell recognized the subtle threat. "Our property's been the same for 20 years. No changes, no violations." "Things change, Mr. Carter. Regulations update. Best to stay compliant." The man handed him a card. "I'll be back next week for a more thorough inspection." That night, after Angela had gone to bed, Darnell checked the security system one last time. All motion alerts from the past 48 hours had been wiped clean, despite the system being armed. On the porch, he looked out into the darkness, sensing eyes watching from somewhere in the quiet neighborhood. "It's starting," he murmured to himself, the words hanging in the night air like a prayer or a curse. He locked the door behind him with a decisive click. 1 second of violence, a lifetime of consequences. 4 days passed in tense waiting. The black SUV no longer parked openly on their street, but Darnell spotted it twice elsewhere in the neighborhood. The code inspector didn't return. Even Officer Klein seemed to be avoiding their usual friendly waves when her patrol car passed. Angela noticed it too. "Something's coming," she said over dinner. "I can feel it." Darnell couldn't disagree. 20 years of military service had taught him the atmosphere before an ambush, that strange, charged stillness. They went to bed early that night, both pretending exhaustion while actually too wired to sleep. Angela finally drifted off around midnight, her breathing settling into a rhythm that Darnell had memorized over decades of marriage. He lay awake beside her, alert to every creak of their old house. At 4:17 a.m. he heard it, the almost imperceptible sound of boots on grass, too many and too synchronized for random neighborhood noise. Darnell slipped out of bed without waking, Angela moving to the window with practiced silence. Through a crack in the curtains he saw them, dark figures surrounding the house, tactical gear reflecting the streetlights. His first thought wasn't fear. It was timing, Still dark enough to confuse residents, but late enough that witnesses would be minimal. Tactical choice. Military thinking. Darnell moved quickly, pulling on pants and a t-shirt. He didn't wake Angela yet. Better to let her sleep until the last possible moment. In the hallway, he grabbed his cane. The old knee injury meant he couldn't move as fast as he once did, but he could still move with purpose. A voice boomed through a bullhorn outside. Darnell and Angela Carter. This is a federal task force. Exit your home immediately with your hands visible. The sound jolted Angela awake. She appeared in the bedroom doorway, confusion and fear etched on her face. Darnell? What's happening? Stay back from the windows, he instructed calmly. They're here for me, not you. Who's here? Her voice rose with panic. Follow me. Walk exactly where I walk. He took her hand, leading her toward the front of the house. When we go out, I'll speak. You stay silent. Darnell, you're scaring me. He turned to her, time slowing as he memorized her face, the laugh lines around her eyes, the silver threading through her dark hair, the strength in her jaw. If this went wrong, he wanted this to be his last clear memory. Trust me, Angie, like you always have, the bullhorn blared again. You have 30 seconds to comply before we enter the premises. Darnell squeezed Angela's hand. I'm going to open the door. Stay behind me. He reached for the handle, his movements deliberate. Before he could turn it, the world exploded. The first flashbang crashed through the living room window, detonating, in a blinding burst of light and sound. A second smashed through the kitchen window almost simultaneously. Angela screamed, the sound distant and distorted through the ringing in Darnell's ears. He dropped to his knees, partly from the disorientation and partly from instinct. The cane clattered to the floor beside him. Angela! He shouted, unable to see her through the smoke now filling the room. Don't move! More crashes as the tactical team breached multiple entry points. Boots thundered across their floors. Shouts echoed. Clear! From room to room, through the chaos, Darnell heard Angela's voice calling his name. She sounded far away, confused. He tried to stand, to move toward her voice, but a boot pressed into his back, forcing him down. Stay down, a masked officer commanded. Don't hurt her, Darnell yelled back, struggling against the pressure. She's not involved. Outside, Angela had stumbled onto the porch, disoriented by the flashbangs. Blood trickled from her ear where the concussive force had ruptured her eardrum. She called Darnell's name again, reaching blindly in the smoke. On the ground. An officer shouted at her. Angela couldn't process the command. Her world was spinning, her hearing damaged. She took another unsteady step, hand outstretched. The officer fired his taser. The prongs hit Angela's chest, sending 50,000 volts coursing through her body. Her muscles locked, her back arched in agony, and she collapsed hard onto the porch, limbs convulsing uncontrollably. Darnell saw it happen through the open doorway. Something primal erupted from his chest, a roar of rage and terror that didn't sound human even to his own ears. With strength born of desperation, he threw off the officer, pinning him down, and lunged toward the porch. Get away from her, he bellowed, charging forward despite the officers closing in. One raised his rifle, training it on Darnell's chest. The red dot of the laser sight trembled over his heart. Time slowed. 20 years of buried secrets, of quiet vigilance, of knowing this day might come. All of it crystallized into absolute clarity. Darnell stopped, standing tall despite his bad knee screaming in protest. In the sudden silence, he spoke 5 words that changed everything. I have the Omega file. The effect was instant and extraordinary. The commanding officer's eyes widened behind his tactical mask. His hand shot up in a halt signal to the others. Stand down, he said, his voice suddenly uncertain, then into his comm unit. He said Omega. Confirm that. I need confirmation on Omega protocol. The officers nearest to Darnell took a step back, confusion evident in their postures. The one who'd been aiming at his chest slowly lowered his weapon, looking to his commander for guidance. Sir, he questioned. The commander's hand was pressed to his earpiece, listening intently. His eyes never left Darnell's face. Confirmed, he finally said. Secure the scene. Medical team for the woman. No arrests. I repeat, no arrests. The tactical team's disciplined formation dissolved into uncertainty. They began backing away from both Darnell and Angela, maintaining distance while clearly unsure what had just happened. Darnell ignored them all, dropping to his knees beside Angela. Her body had stopped convulsing, but she lay frighteningly still, her breathing shallow. "Angela," he whispered, taking her hand. "Stay with me." Her eyes fluttered. "Darnell, what's happening?" "It's going to be okay," he promised, though he wasn't sure if that was truth or hope speaking. Across the street, lights had come on in neighboring houses. Faces peered through windows. Someone was filming from a porch. And there, half hidden behind a parked car, was Andre, his camera raised, capturing everything. The tactical team moved with new urgency, no longer focused on Darnell, but on controlling the growing audience. 2 medics approached with a stretcher. "We need to take her for evaluation," one said to Darnell. "I'm coming with her." The medic looked to the commander, who gave a short nod. Let him ride along. As they loaded Angela onto the stretcher, Darnell caught a glimpse of Officer Sarah Klein arriving at the scene in her patrol car, her face a mask of shock as she took in the chaos. The commander approached Darnell as Angela was secured in the ambulance. "This isn't over," he said quietly, his voice pitched low enough that only Darnell could hear. "You understand what you've done?" Darnell met his gaze steadily. "I understand what you've done. That's the point." Something like respect or fear flickered across the commander's face before he turned away. In the ambulance, holding Angela's hand as the sirens wailed, Darnell's mind raced. 20 years of silence broken with 5 words. There would be no going back now. Angela stirred, her eyes finding his in the dim light. "Why?" she started, her voice weak. "Shh," he soothed. "Rest now. I'll explain everything when you're stronger." She squeezed his hand, a gesture of trust that broke his heart. After all these years, he'd kept her safe by keeping her in the dark. That protection was gone now. At the hospital, they separated them immediately. A nurse directed Darnell to a waiting area while they took Angela for routine tests. Hours passed with no updates. When he demanded information from the nurse's station, he was told only that his wife was stable and under observation. "I want to see her," Darnell insisted. "Doctor's orders," the nurse replied, not meeting his eyes. "No visitors until assessment is complete." Darnell recognized stonewalling when he saw it. He settled back into the uncomfortable waiting room chair, conserving his energy. This was just the beginning. Near midnight, as the waiting room emptied of all but Darnell, a nurse he hadn't seen before approached. "Your wife is in room 307, she whispered, pretending to straighten magazines on a nearby table. "They told us not to call you. Someone higher up." Darnell nodded his thanks, moving quickly toward the elevator before anyone could stop him. The 3rd floor was quieter than the ER, the lighting dimmer. He found room 307 and slipped inside. Angela lay asleep, an IV in one arm, monitors beeping softly beside her. Her face looked peaceful, but the angry red marks where the taser prongs had struck were visible above the hospital gown. Darnell sank into the chair beside her bed, taking her hand gently in his. She stirred, but didn't wake. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "For all of it." A soft knock interrupted his vigil. Darnell tensed, expecting security come to remove him. Instead, an older black man in hospital chaplain attire entered, closing the door quietly behind him. "The Spirit provides comfort in our darkest hours," the chaplain said, his voice low but carrying clearly. Darnell stared, recognition dawning, slowly. "Reggie?" Reggie Monroe, 20 years older and grayer than when they'd served together, nodded slightly. "It's been a long time, brother." "How did you—" "They found you because they know you still have it," Reggie interrupted, sitting beside Darnell. Saying its name out loud was either the bravest or stupidest thing you could have done. It worked, didn't it? For now. Reggie's eyes darted to the door, then back. But you need to disappear, both of you, as soon as she's stable. I'm done. Running, Reg. Then you'd better be ready for what's coming. Reggie pressed something into Darnell's palm, a key. Storage unit in your name, paid up for 20 years. Everything you might need is there. He stood. I was never here. After Reggie left, Darnell sat watching Angela breathe, the key heavy in his hand. Dawn crept through the hospital window before he finally left, kissing Angela's forehead and promising to return. At home, the scene of the raid was eerily cleaned up, windows replaced, debris removed, as if nothing had happened. Only the neighbor's wary stares as he walked up the path suggested otherwise. Inside, Darnell went straight to his bedroom, pulling up the loose floorboard beneath the nightstand. The lockbox was still there, untouched. Either they hadn't found it, or they'd been ordered to leave it once he mentioned Omega. The small metal box opened with a key he'd kept on his person for 20 years. Inside lay a worn USB drive, scratched and weathered with a faded Greek letter etched into its surface. Oh, the Omega file. His insurance policy. His burden. His truth. Darnell closed his hand around it, knowing that after 20 years of silence, the real fight was just beginning. When the smoke clears, the hunt begins. The hospital discharged Angela 3 days after the raid. The official diagnosis read neural electrical trauma, but the resident neurologist had looked uncomfortable when explaining it to Darnell. These symptoms aren't typical for standard taser exposure, she'd said quietly, glancing at the door, as if expecting someone to walk in. The tremors, the blackouts, they're more consistent with higher voltage or prolonged exposure. Now, as Darnell helped Angela up the porch steps of their home, he noticed how her hand trembled in his. She'd already had 2 blackouts at the hospital, each lasting only seconds but leaving her disoriented and frightened. Home, Angela whispered, pausing at the threshold. Her eyes traveled over the new windows, the fresh paint where the flashbangs had scorched the walls. They tried to erase it all. They can't erase what matters, Darnell said, guiding her inside. The living room was spotless, too spotless. Someone had arranged the furniture slightly differently, the photo frames on, the mantel shifted by inches. The message was clear. We've been here, we've touched your things, we can return any time. Angela sank into her favorite armchair, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. Are you going to tell me what's happening now? What you said to make them stop? Before Darnell could answer, a knock on the door made them both tense. Through the window, Darnell spotted Andre shifting nervously on the porch, his ever-present camera bag slung over his shoulder. It's just Andre, Darnell said, relief evident in his voice. The teenager stepped inside tentatively, his eyes widening at the sight of Angela. Mrs. C, are you okay? His voice cracked with emotion. I've been better, sweetheart. Angela offered a weak smile. But I'm home now. Andre turned to Darnell, reaching into his bag. Mr. C, I need to show you something. He pulled out his camera. I was filming a night sky time-lapse for my project when they came. I got everything. Darnell's pulse quickened. Everything? Andre nodded solemnly. From when the trucks arrived until they took you both away. I was across the street behind. The Miller's oak tree. He connected the camera to his laptop. Watch this part. The footage was remarkably clear for a night recording. Andre had captured the tactical team's arrival, the flashbangs, Angela being tased. But what he highlighted was the moment after. Darnell spoke the 5 words. A clear shot of the lead officer's face, mask now pulled down, expression transitioning from controlled aggression to shock and fear. I've never seen a SWAT team back down like that, Andre said. What did you say to them, Mr. C? Darnell exchanged a look with Angela, whose eyes reflected the same question. Something they didn't expect to hear, Darnell answered carefully. Something they're afraid of. People are talking, Andre continued. My video isn't the only one. The Wilsons got footage from their security camera, and Mrs. Peterson was streaming live from her phone. It's all over social media with the hashtag, Why'd they stop? Angela leaned forward. Andre, I need you to be very careful with that footage. The people who came here, they don't play by normal rules. That's why I made copies, Andre said, his young face suddenly serious beyond his years. One on my cloud drive, one with my cousin in Atlanta, and one on this. He handed Darnell a small USB drive. Nobody can erase all of them. After Andre left, Darnell helped Angela to bed for a nap. As she drifted off, he sat watching her breathe, counting each rise and fall of her chest as if it might be the last. His phone vibrated, a text from an unknown number. Check your back fence. Left side, 20 minutes. 19 minutes later, Darnell eased open the back gate. Officer Sarah Klein waited in the alley, her patrol car nowhere in sight, civilian clothes replacing her uniform. I shouldn't be here, she said without preamble. But you are. Sarah's eyes darted around the alley. That raid. Something's wrong with the whole setup. The order came through as Homeland Security, but when I requested the documentation, there's nothing. No warrant, no operation log, not even an incident report. You're risking a lot telling me this. I took an oath to protect people, not to help black bag them in the middle of the night. Sarah ran a hand through her hair. What did you say to make them back off? Darnell studied her face, weighing trust against caution. I mentioned something they thought was buried. Something they're afraid might come to light. Is it something I should be afraid of too? That depends on what you believe about who we're supposed to be as a country, Darnell answered. Back inside, Darnell found Angela in the kitchen, her hands gripping the counter as another tremor passed through her body. It's getting worse, she said, frustration edging her voice. And don't tell me it's normal. We'll find better doctors, Darnell promised, helping her to a chair. What we need are answers. Angela's eyes met his, steel beneath the fatigue. I was there, Darnell, in Nevada. I saw you bury something in the desert during what you called your PTSD phase. I never asked because I thought you needed to process the war in your own way. She reached for his hand. But this isn't just about the war, is it? The weight of 20 years of secrets pressed on Darnell's chest. No, he finally said. It never was. Before he could continue, there was another knock at the door. This time it was Pastor Wallace from their church, a man they'd known for 15 years. Thought I'd check on you both, he said, settling into the living room with the practiced ease of a long-time spiritual counselor. Word about what happened has spread through the congregation. They talked about the raid, Angela's health, the community's response. But as the pastor was leaving, he leaned close to Darnell. Some files were never meant to be opened, or to survive those who carried them, he whispered, his usually warm eyes suddenly distant. Remember that, brother. The door closed behind him before Darnell could respond. That night, Angela woke screaming from a nightmare, something she'd never done before. Darnell held her until the terror subsided. I saw men in unmarked uniforms, she whispered against his chest. They were dragging people from their homes. You were trying to stop them, but your voice made no sound. Darnell stroked her hair, saying nothing. Her dream wasn't far from a reality he'd witnessed years ago. The next morning, Sarah texted again. Found something. Iron wall. Meet me. In a coffee shop 20 miles from their neighborhood, Sarah slid a file across the table. Iron wall, she said quietly. Private military contractor that worked under Pentagon, oversight during the war, went private sector afterward. Still has deep government connections. Darnell opened the file, scanning names and operation records. Where did you get this? I have a friend in digital records. She found references to them connected to the raid authorization. Sarah leaned forward. Their CEO is a man named Evan Stroud, former special ops, then military intelligence. The company specializes in problem resolution for certain government agencies. Problem resolution, Darnell repeated. Nice way of saying cleanup. Whatever you have on them, it's got them spooked enough to raid a civilian home on American soil. Darnell closed the file. Thank you for this, Sarah, but you need to walk away now, for your own safety. That's not how this works, Sarah replied. I crossed the line the moment I questioned that raid order. I'm in this. While Darnell was meeting with Sarah, Angela spotted a woman in scrubs entering her neurologist's office. Something about her movements seemed off, too precise, too alert. When the receptionist stepped away, the woman began flipping through files at the desk. Angela pulled out her phone, pretending to text while secretly recording. The woman found a file, Angela's file, and quickly photographed several pages before replacing it. Later, Angela showed the recording to Darnell. She was never ID checked, never signed in. "We need to be more careful," Darnell said, his face grave. "What we need is to stop hiding." Angela's voice rose with rare anger. 20 years, Darnell. 20 years you've carried whatever this is alone. Now they've brought it to our doorstep, into our lives. I was attacked in my own home. I was trying to protect you. And now I need the truth to protect myself. Tears welled in her eyes. No more secrets between us, not now. The truth hung between them like a living thing, dangerous, volatile, necessary. That night, tensions reached a breaking point. "I want to go public," Angela said, sitting across from Darnell at their kitchen table. "Andre's footage, my medical, records, everything. That would paint a target on us bigger than the one we already have," Darnell argued. "We're already targets. At least this way, if something happens, people will ask questions." Darnell's hands clenched on the table. "Or they'll silence those questions like they've silenced others. We need leverage before we move. The Omega file isn't enough leverage? It's insurance, not a weapon." Darnell met her gaze. "Not yet." Their argument was interrupted by a text from Andre. "Need to see you. Bringing friend. Important." An hour later, Andre arrived with a tall, lanky teenager Darnell recognized as Elijah Taylor, a computer prodigy who'd won the state science fair with a homebrew encryption algorithm. "Elijah can help," Andre said simply. Elijah looked nervous but determined. "Andre showed me what happened, what they did to Mrs. Carter." He opened his laptop. "I want to help crack whatever's on that drive you mentioned." Darnell hesitated. "What makes you think there's a drive?" "Because you said something about a file that made them back off," Andre explained. "And whatever it is, they're willing to hurt people to keep it quiet." Angela touched Darnell's arm. "They're already involved. Andre's footage put him on their radar the moment it went online." With a heavy sigh, Darnell nodded. He retrieved the USB drive from its hiding place and handed it to Elijah. The teen worked silently, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "Military-grade encryption," he muttered. "Old school, though. From the file creation date, it's 2004? "Can you open it?" Angela asked. "Parts of it." Elijah's face lit blue in the glow of his screen. "I'm seeing fragments, names, locations." His voice trailed off as his eyes widened. "Sir, what is this?" Darnell looked over his shoulder. On the screen were partial documents, redacted reports of operations, lists of civilian casualties, GPS coordinates for mass graves. "The truth," Darnell said quietly, "about what really happened during certain peacekeeping missions." "This is just the first layer," Elijah said. "There's more encryption beneath. It'll take time to crack fully." Before they could continue, Elijah pulled out a small device from his backpack. "First, let's make sure we're alone." He powered on the device, which emitted a soft hum as he moved around the room. Near the thermostat, it began beeping rapidly. "Bug," Elijah said simply. He moved to the kitchen where the device beeped again near the smoke detector. Another one. Finally, at the electrical panel in the hallway. "Signal interceptor on your smart meter. They're monitoring everything. Conversations, internet, traffic, power usage." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. "How long?" Angela whispered. "Based on the dust patterns, at least a week," Elijah answered. "Maybe longer." Darnell's face hardened. "Pack what you need," he told Angela. "We're not staying here tonight." The past buried, the truth unchained. The sun rose over the Nevada desert, painting the rocky landscape in shades of amber and gold. Darnell stood alone beside his rental car, staring at a formation of rocks that had haunted his dreams for 2 decades. He'd left Angela with Sarah, insisting this journey was one he needed to make alone. The desert held too many ghosts, some buried, some still wandering the sand, in his nightmares. With his cane supporting his bad knee, Darnell made his way to the rock formation. 20 years ago, he'd been younger, faster, terrified as he dug the small hole beneath these stones. Now he moved slowly, deliberately, using a small folding shovel from his pack. 6 inches down, his shovel struck something solid. A small metal container, military grade, sealed against the elements. Inside was another USB drive, identical to the first but in pristine condition, protected from time and the desert's harsh conditions. As Darnell stood, he caught a glint of sunlight reflecting off metal in the distance. Squinting, he made out the unmistakable shape of a surveillance drone hovering just at the horizon line. They were watching, had probably been tracking him since he'd booked the flight to Nevada. Let them watch, he thought. It was too late to stop what was coming. Back in a motel room on the outskirts of Las Vegas, Darnell examined the backup drive. It seemed intact, untouched by the years it had spent buried in the earth. Like a time capsule preserving a truth no one wanted found. His phone rang. "Angela, did you find it?" she asked without preamble. "Yes, heading back tomorrow." "Darnell," her voice softened. "Before you left, I remembered something. A letter you wrote before your final mission. You asked me to keep it sealed unless..." She paused. "Unless you didn't come back." Darnell closed his eyes, the memory surfacing. "I'd forgotten about that. You wrote about things you never wanted to live with, if you survived." Angela's voice trembled slightly. "Was it about this? About what happened there?" "Yes," he admitted. "I thought if I didn't make it back, someone should know the truth. But when I survived, I decided it was safer buried." "For who, Darnell? For me? Or for the people in those files?" The question hung between them, 3 states and 20 years of silence stretching the distance further. 2 days later, they gathered in a garage owned by one of Elijah's uncles. Darnell, Angela, Sarah, Andre, and Elijah. The space had been swept for bugs, the windows blacked out, the electricity sourced from a generator to avoid any smart meter monitoring. "Both drives have the same base encryption," Elijah explained, connecting the Nevada backup. "But this one hasn't been partially corrupted by time. We should get the full file." They watched in tense silence as Elijah worked, bypassing security protocols that had been cutting edge when the file was created, but were now vulnerable to new techniques. "I'm in," Elijah finally said, his voice hushed with awe. The screen filled with folders, each labeled with dates and operation codes. Elijah clicked on one marked with a red flag. Video footage appeared, grainy but clear enough to see what was happening. American soldiers and contractors in unmarked gear, surrounding a village. Civilians being gathered in the central square. A commander giving orders. Then, methodically, executions. Buildings burned, evidence eliminated. Sarah turned, away, her face ashen. "This can't be real." "It's real," Darnell said quietly. "Operation Claystone. Officially, we were there to flush out insurgents. Unofficially..." He gestured to the screen. It was a cleansing operation. Villages suspected of harboring enemies were simply erased. Miami. Unit was supposed to be backup, he continued. "We arrived as this was happening. I saw it with my own eyes, recorded what I could, copied files from a commander's laptop when chaos broke out." Elijah opened another folder. "There's more. Operation logs, communications, authorizations." He scrolled through documents. "These names keep appearing. Senator Hayes, General Covington, and someone named Evan Stroud." "Iron Wall," Sarah whispered. "They were contractors then," Darnell confirmed. "Now they're a private military corporation with government ties and a CEO who wants these files buried forever." Angela stared at the screen, tears streaming silently down her face. She reached for Darnell's hand, squeezing it tightly. "All this time," she said, her voice breaking. "All this time you carried this alone. I thought I was protecting you. You were drowning. and I couldn't even throw you a line because I didn't know you were underwater." The hurt in her eyes gave way to something harder, more determined. "No more. Whatever comes next, we face it together." That night, back at a safe house Sarah had arranged, Darnell stepped into the backyard for a moment of fresh air. The crack of a bullet hitting the fence beside him sent him diving to the ground. He crawled to cover behind a stone planter, heart pounding. No second shot came. When he finally dared to look, he found a bullet hole precisely at the height where his head had been. A warning, not a miss. "Message received," he muttered to the darkness. Inside, he found Angela waiting, fear and resolve battling in her expression. "Someone just took a shot at me," he said before she could ask. "Warning, not an attempt. They're escalating." She pulled him close, her body still trembling from the after effects of the taser. "We need to move faster." The next morning, Sarah arrived with news. "I took a risk," she admitted. "I leaked part of the Omega dossier to Jordan Blake at the Tribune. He's an investigative journalist I trust." "That's dangerous," Darnell warned. "So is sitting on this while they come after us," Sarah countered. "Blake has a secure channel and an international platform. If something happens to any of us, the story doesn't die." But by afternoon, Sarah's plan had unraveled. The article never appeared online. When she called Blake, his editor claimed he'd sighed, never received any files, and had suddenly taken personal leave. "It's gone," Sarah said, pacing the safe house living room. "The entire file I sent vanished from his secure server. Blake isn't answering calls." "They've got hooks everywhere," Darnell said grimly. "Media, law enforcement, government. That's what 20 years of operating in shadows buys you." Elijah, who'd been quiet while enhancing the video files, suddenly called them over. "Look at this," he said, zooming in on footage of the tactical team during the raid on Darnell's home. "This officer here, when you mentioned Omega, watch his reaction." The footage showed a clear tremor passing through the man, his rifle lowering. "Before the commander even gave the order." "He knew," Andre whispered. "They all knew what it meant." "Which means they were briefed," Sarah added. "This wasn't just some random raid. They came specifically prepared for the possibility of you mentioning that file." Elijah had continued working while they talked. "There's more. I found embedded GPS data in some of these Omega files, coordinates." He pulled up a map with locations marked across the United States. "These don't correspond to any known military bases or facilities." Darnell leaned closer, recognition dawning in his eyes. "Those are black sites," he said, his voice hollow. "Detention facilities off the books, outside oversight." "But these files are 20 years old," Angela pointed out. "Surely they've been shut down since then." Darnell stared at the map, each marker a testament to secrets buried deeper than his USB drive in the Nevada desert. "No," he said quietly. "They never shut it down. If the system won't protect the truth, then the people will." Morning light filtered through the blinds of the safe house as Darnell laid out 5 hand-drawn maps on the kitchen table. Angela, Sarah, Andre, and Elijah gathered around, their faces solemn in the golden glow. "These are the black sites I could identify from the GPS coordinates," Darnell explained, his finger tracing circles around several locations. "What the military called ghost cages, places where people disappeared." "Are you sure they're still active?" Sarah asked, studying the nearest map. 3 of them show recent satellite activity," Elijah answered, scrolling through images on his laptop. "Power consumption, supply deliveries, security rotations. This one in Colorado shows the most traffic." Darnell straightened, wincing as his bad knee protested. "Then that's where we start." "Start what exactly?" Andre asked, his young face a mixture of fear and determination. "The mission," Darnell replied simply. "Exposing what they tried to bury 20 years ago, and what they're still doing today." Angela placed her hand over his. "We need a plan, and we need help. We can't do this alone." "I know some people," Darnell said quietly. "Men and women I served with, people who came back questioning what we were really doing over there." That afternoon, Darnell made a series of calls from a burner phone. One by one, old comrades answered, some immediately. others after long pauses when they heard his voice. Some had changed their numbers, moved across country, tried to outrun the same memories that had haunted Darnell, but they hadn't forgotten. By evening, 7 had agreed to help, former soldiers in their 60s and 70s now, with creaking joints and fading eyesight, but with skills that had never quite disappeared, and a sense of justice that had only grown sharper with age. Frank. Miller's got a truck route that passes near the Colorado site, Darnell told the others. Says he can provide surveillance. Jackson's working security at a tech firm now. He'll handle communications. Wilcox and Thomas are already on their way here. While Darnell organized his old unit, Angela embarked on a mission of her own. With Sarah providing transportation, she visited the families of soldiers who had been part of Operation Claystone, men who had never returned, or had returned, changed beyond recognition. At a small house in Franklin Park, Margaret Benson invited Angela in for tea. Photos of her son lined the mantel, a smiling young man in uniform, forever 23. Robert wrote me strange letters toward the end, Margaret confided, hands trembling around her teacup. Said he was seeing things that weren't in the mission briefing. His last call home, he told me if anything happened to him, it wasn't what they'd say it was. 2 weeks later, they told me he died in an ambush, she continued, tears welling. But they cremated him before I could see him. No other casualties reported that day. Just my Robert. Angela reached across the table, taking the woman's weathered hand in hers. I always knew something didn't feel right, Margaret whispered. By all. The time Angela returned to the safe house, she had spoken with 5 families. Each story added another piece to the puzzle. Soldiers who had seen too much, asked too many questions, and paid the ultimate price. We're not just doing this for justice, she told Darnell that night. We're doing it for them. For all the Roberts who never came home, and for all the Margarets who never got the truth. 3 days later, their plan was in motion. Andre and Elijah established a secure communication network using obsolete radio equipment that wouldn't trigger modern surveillance. Sarah coordinated with her trusted contacts in law enforcement, creating a warning system for any unusual activity. Angela organized the evidence they had gathered, preparing it for distribution if necessary. Darnell's old comrades arrived one by one, men and women with gray hair and weathered faces, carrying skills instead of weapons. Betty Wilcox, once the best communications specialist in their unit, now walked with a cane but could still break any encryption thrown her way. Marcus Thomas had been their transportation expert and arrived driving a nondescript van with custom modifications. Just like old times, Thomas said as he embraced Darnell. Except we're fighting for the right side this time, for sure. Their first target was the facility in Colorado, an abandoned-looking industrial plant surrounded by chain-link fence and discreet security cameras. Frank Miller's truck route took him past it twice weekly, allowing him to document patterns and rotations. 3 guard changes daily, he reported over their secure channel. Minimal external presence. They're keeping it low profile. Supply. Truck every Tuesday morning. No markings, but the same driver. For 2 weeks they gathered intelligence, building a complete picture of the facility's operations. What emerged was disturbing. A partially decommissioned site that still showed signs of recent activity. We need to get inside, Darnell finally said during their strategy meeting. Surveillance only tells us so much. That's a military black site, Sarah objected. Even if it's operating at reduced capacity, it's still going to have serious security. Which is why we don't break in, Angela said, surprising everyone. We walk in. Her plan was elegant in its simplicity. Using IDs created by Elijah based on contractor credentials found in the Omega file, Angela and Sarah would pose as oversight inspectors from Ironwall headquarters. The timing would coincide with the regular Tuesday delivery, creating multiple points of attention for security. It's too dangerous, Darnell argued. If they realize who you are, they're looking for you, not me, Angela countered. My face isn't in their databases. And we need a woman for this. They'll be less suspicious. After hours of debate, they reluctantly agreed. The following Tuesday, Angela and Sarah approached the facility's main gate in a car rented under a false name. Both wore severe business attire, and carried clipboards with official-looking documentation. "Compliance inspection," Sarah told the guard, presenting their forged credentials. "Unannounced from headquarters. We have concerns about protocol breaches." The guard examined their IDs, made a call, then waved them through with a bored expression. Inside, a tired-looking administrator met them, clearly unhappy about the surprise inspection. "We weren't notified about any compliance review," he complained, leading them through sterile corridors. "That's rather the point of unannounced, isn't it?" Angela replied crisply, channeling the arrogance she'd encountered from countless bureaucrats over the years. For 2 hours they moved through the facility, clipboard notes concealing the tiny camera Elijah had provided. The upper levels were indeed largely decommissioned, empty offices, shuttered labs, minimal staff. But when they accidentally took a wrong turn down a service stairwell, they discovered the truth. The basement level hummed with activity. Through a reinforced window, they glimpsed what appeared to be medical equipment, examination tables, and locked rooms with small observation windows. "This area is restricted," their escort said sharply, moving to block their path. "Even for compliance officers, is that so?" Sarah challenged, falling into her role. "Protocol requires total facility access. Unless you have something to hide from headquarters?" The threat worked. Reluctantly, the administrator led them through the lower level, explaining it away as ongoing research and voluntary rehabilitation programs. But in one room, Angela made eye contact with a young Hispanic boy, no more than 15, watching them through a reinforced window with hollow, hopeless eyes. Next to him, 2 men in their 30s, both with the same defeated expression. "Our rehabilitation subjects," the administrator explained smoothly. "Undocumented individuals who have chosen program participation over deportation." "I'd like to interview them," Angela said. "Alone. Standard protocol." After tense negotiation, she was granted 10 minutes with the detainees while Sarah kept the eye. Administrator occupied with paperwork questions. Inside the room, Angela spoke quickly. "We're not who they think we are. We're here to help." She slipped a small device under the table, a tracker Elijah had designed. "Help is coming," the older man spoke in a whisper. "They inject us with things. Take blood, tissue samples. Some people never come back from the testing rooms." "What's your name?" Angela asked. "Miguel. This is my brother Carlos and his son Tadeo. We crossed the border 3 months ago and were picked up, but not by Border Patrol. Men in unmarked vans." Angela's heart raced. "Hold on a little longer, Miguel, you're not forgotten." Back in the car, driving away from the facility with measured calm, Angela and Sarah waited until they were miles away before speaking. "They're using them as test subjects," Angela said, her voice shaking with rage. "Human experiments under the guise of rehabilitation." "I got everything on camera," Sarah confirmed. "And your tracker is active. Elijah's receiving the signal." That night, they reviewed the evidence. Footage of the facility, testimony from Miguel, structural information about the building's layout. They worked in shifts, compiling it all into an actionable plan. 3 days later, they returned, this time with Darnell, Marcus, and 2 other veterans, using the supply truck's arrival as cover. With Sarah creating a diversion at the front, Gate and Angela's inside knowledge of the patrol rotations, they gained access to the lower level. The rescue was not without complications. An alarm triggered as they located the detention area, forcing them to move quickly. Miguel, Carlos, and Tadeo were weak but mobile. 2 guards attempted to intervene but were quickly subdued and locked in a storage closet. "This way," Darnell directed, leading them through a service corridor Angela had identified. "Thomas is waiting with the van." As they drove away, Tadeo clutched his father's hand, tears streaming down his face. "I thought we would die there," he whispered in Spanish. "I thought everyone had forgotten us." Carlos turned to Darnell. "There were others before us, many others. They kept records. I saw them when they moved me between rooms." Elijah worked through the night, decrypting files from a hard drive they'd seized during the rescue. By morning, he had broken through the first layer of security. "It's worse than we thought," he said, his young face pale with shock. "These aren't just random detentions, it's a systematic program." He turned his laptop to show them an email chain between General Covington and private pharmaceutical companies, with Ironwall as the intermediary. "The black sites were never about national security," Darnell said, reading over Elijah's shoulder. "They're revenue-driven human labs. Ironwall leases access to test subjects for experimental drug trials, weapons tests, psychological research. Paid for with our tax dollars," Sarah added bitterly. With the evidence compiled, they reached out to Diana Levinson, an editor at the National Times known for her fearless reporting. After reviewing what they'd gathered, she agreed to publish a comprehensive exposé. But the morning the story was set to run, it never appeared. When Sarah called Diana, her assistant claimed she was on indefinite leave. The journalists who had worked on the piece received gag orders citing national security concerns. "They're always one step ahead," Darnell said, pacing the safe house living room. "Every system we try to use, they've already compromised. Then we bypass the systems," Andre suggested. "Go directly to the people who need to know." Darnell paused, considering. The families of the soldiers who died because of what they saw. That night, they enacted what Darnell called Operation Truth Fall, a coordinated anonymous delivery of selected Omega files to every family of a deceased soldier from Operation Claystone. Each package contained evidence relevant to their loved one's death, along with instructions for secure communication. "We can't reach everyone through traditional channels," Angela explained to Miguel and his family, now safely housed with a CAO support network of veterans. "But we can create enough voices asking questions that they can't silence them all." Within days, online forums began buzzing with posts from family members sharing redacted documents and demanding answers. What started as isolated questions grew into a coordinated movement as families connected, comparing the information they'd received. As their plan gained momentum, the danger intensified. Driving back from a meeting with one of the families, Angela felt her car's steering suddenly go loose, the vehicle veering toward a concrete barrier. She managed to guide it to a stop using the emergency brake, her heart pounding. Mechanics later confirmed the brake lines had been cleanly cut. That night, Angela found Darnell sitting alone in the dark, his face illuminated only by the glow of his phone as he scrolled through messages from more families coming forward. "They tried to kill me today," she said without preamble. Darnell looked up, his expression shifting from shock to a cold determination she'd rarely seen. "I wanted to keep you safe," he said after a long silence. "That's why I buried it all. The file, the memories, what I'd seen. I thought if I just lived quietly, helped people in small ways, maybe it would balance the scales for all I didn't do back then." Angela sat beside him, taking his hand. "You did what you could. You preserved the truth when everyone else was burying it. And now?" She looked him in the eye, her decision made. "If we go down having told the world. What they built in darkness must collapse in the light." The text came at 3:17 a.m., a single garbled message from Sarah. "Compromised. West Virginia, file 28. Then silence. "They've got her," Darnell said, staring at the phone. "She was investigating one of Ironwall's shell companies in Charleston." "We need to find her," Angela insisted. "Before they—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Elijah worked frantically, trying to trace Sarah's last known location. Her phone's offline, but it last pinged near a property owned by Meridian Holdings, another Ironwall front. "I've got a satellite image of the location," Andre added, showing them his laptop. "Looks like a compound in rural West Virginia. Isolated, secure perimeter." Darnell studied the image, his military training kicking in. Guard towers here and here. Main building with probable sublevels. Vehicle depot to the east. "We can't just storm a private military compound," Angela argued. "There are probably 50 trained operatives in there." "We don't need 50, Darnell replied quietly. "We just need an opening." Within hours, Darnell had assembled a rescue team, Marcus, Betty, and 4 other veterans who had rallied to their cause. Using equipment sourced through Marcus's security, Connections, they prepared for a stealth insertion. "We go in quiet," Darnell instructed as they gathered in an abandoned barn 10 miles from the compound. "No weapons except as a last resort. This is extraction only." Betty had hacked into the compound's communication system, creating a scheduled maintenance alert that would temporarily disable certain security measures. Marcus had identified a drainage culvert that would allow access to the property undetected. Night fell. They moved into position, each person carrying only what was essential. Darnell led, his bad knee screaming with each step through the muddy culvert, but his face betraying no pain. When they emerged on the compound grounds, Betty's diversion worked perfectly. Guards were focused on a malfunctioning gate sensor on the opposite side of the property. Moving in coordinated silence, they made their way to a service entrance Marcus had identified. Inside, they split into 2 teams, Marcus leading one to secure their exit route, Darnell leading the other to locate Sarah. Following the building, schematics Elijah had reconstructed, they navigated through service corridors, avoiding patrols. In a basement room marked Archive, they found her, bound to a chair, bruised but alive, her eyes widening in disbelief as Darnell appeared in, the doorway. "Took you long enough," she whispered, her split lip curling into a pained smile. As Marcus created a distraction in another wing, they made their escape, Sarah leaning heavily on Darnell. In the archive room, Betty had quickly downloaded files. From an unsecured terminal, a treasure trove of Ironwall's internal documents. Their exit was nearly clean until an alarm blared in the east wing. Guards scrambled, but the team had already reached the drainage culvert. By the time a full lockdown was initiated, they were driving away in nondescript vehicles, taking separate routes back to their rendezvous point. "How did you find me?" Sarah asked as Angela treated her injuries in the safe house kitchen. "Elijah traced your phone. Andre spotted the compound." Darnell sat across from her, relief evident in his face. "What happened?" Sarah winced as Angela cleaned a cut above her eye. "I was following money trails from Ironwall's public contracts. Found a shell company. Went to check their physical location. Someone made me as soon as I arrived." She reached for a glass of water with shaking hands. "They were waiting, Darnell. Like they knew I was coming." "What did they want?" "Information on all of you, the Omega file, where it was stored." She looked down. "I didn't break, but before they took my phone, I managed to send you that message about File 28. "What is File 28? Angela asked. "Their kill list," Sarah replied. Grimly. "I saw it on a computer screen while they were interrogating me. Names, locations, surveillance photos of people marked for elimination. Whistleblowers, journalists, activists, anyone they consider a threat." She met Darnell's eyes. "You and Angela are both on it." The revelation hung heavy in the room. Not just targets, but marked for assassination by a private military company operating on American soil. Later that night, as the others slept, Angela found Darnell reviewing the files Betty had retrieved from the compound. "Anything useful?" she asked, sitting beside him. "More than we could have hoped for." He turned the laptop to show her. "Personnel records, operation logs, financial transfers, and this." He opened a document, a Pentagon Task Force report from 2002, authorizing funding for private contractors to establish extrajudicial detention and research facilities on domestic soil. "There's a list of authorizing officials," Darnell continued, "including a budget oversight officer named Angela Morris." Angela stared at the screen, the blood draining from her face. "That was my maiden name." "You worked at the Pentagon before we met," Darnell said carefully. "Budget office, you told me." "I approved funding packages," she whispered. "They came through as special projects with security classifications. I never knew what they were for, Darnell. I just processed the paperwork." Tears streamed down her face as the realization hit her. "I helped them build this. All these years. Fighting for justice, and I didn't even know I was part of creating the very thing we're fighting against." Darnell took her hands. "You didn't know. None of us knew the full picture back then. We all carried pieces of it thinking we were serving something greater." By morning, a new plan had formed. They couldn't rely on traditional media or government channels. Both had proven compromised, but they had something powerful: evidence, testimony, and Andre's documentary skills. For the next week, Andre worked tirelessly, compiling footage of the raid on Darnell's home, testimony from the rescued detainees, evidence from the Omega file, and interviews with families of Operation Claystone soldiers. The result was a 3-hour documentary that laid bare the entire conspiracy, from the war crimes 20 years ago to the ongoing human experimentation. "We need to get this out everywhere at once," Andre explained. "So they can't contain it." Elijah had the solution: a coordinated release across 50 mirrored websites worldwide, timed to go live simultaneously, with download options that would allow it to spread, even if the original sites were taken down. "Once it's out, it can't be put back in the bottle," he said confidently. The documentary launched at midnight. By morning, it had been downloaded thousands of times. Social media exploded with clips and screenshots despite aggressive efforts to remove them. The hashtag #NabishOmegaTruth began trending globally. Something unexpected happened as the documentary spread. Hackers around the world, inspired by what they saw, began targeting Iron Wall's digital infrastructure. Within days, payroll records, offshore accounts, and internal memos were being leaked by anonymous sources. The walls protecting the powerful began to crack. Iron Wall CEO Evan Stroud, a man who had operated in shadows for decades, was suddenly thrust into the spotlight. The company hastily organized a televised press conference, where Stroud denied all allegations with practiced confidence. "These claims are not only false, but dangerous to national security," he stated calmly. "Iron Wall has proudly served this country's interests for over 20 years, always within the bounds of law and ethical conduct." But when a reporter asked about a specific document from File 28, the kill list, Stroud froze momentarily, his composure cracking. The clip went viral, his split-second reaction more damning than any evidence. As public pressure mounted, Darnell organized a peaceful protest outside Capitol Hill, hundreds of veterans and their families standing in silent witness, many holding photos of soldiers lost during Operation Claystone. The crowd grew as ordinary citizens joined, until the gathering stretched for blocks. They chanted just one phrase, again and again: "Omega is truth." The protest caught the attention of several members of Congress who had been receiving thousands of constituent calls about the Omega revelations. Under mounting pressure, a special committee was formed to investigate the allegations. Darnell was called to testify, with Angela at his side. As he spoke, military brass and senators shifted uncomfortably in their seats, particularly when he presented the evidence of black sites on American soil. "These aren't just historical wrongs," Darnell testified, his voice steady. "These are ongoing crimes against American citizens and vulnerable people in our care. And they're being committed with taxpayer dollars, authorized at the highest levels." Senator Hayes, who had appeared repeatedly in the Omega documents, faced particularly intense scrutiny. When journalists uncovered financial ties between him and Iron Wall's shell companies, the pressure became too great. He resigned amid calls for criminal investigation, claiming health concerns but fooling no one. The dominoes were beginning to fall. But Iron Wall wouldn't go down without a fight. Late one night, as Darnell and Angela slept in a different safe house, their third that month, a car bomb detonated outside. Only a last-minute decision to move to an interior room saved them from the blast that shattered windows and reduced the front of the house to rubble. As emergency vehicles surrounded the smoldering structure, Darnell held Angela close. Both of them covered in dust but miraculously unharmed. "This means we're winning," he whispered into her hair. "They tried to bury us, but we were seeds." Dawn broke over the safe house as Darnell, Angela, Andre, Elijah, and their growing network of allies gathered around a table covered with maps, documents, and laptops. The bombing had shaken them, but it had also hardened their resolve. "They're desperate," Darnell said, studying satellite images of Iron Wall's headquarters. "Desperate means dangerous, but it also means vulnerable." "The documentary is everywhere now," Andre reported, checking download statistics. "Over 2 million views in the last 48 hours despite takedown attempts. People are asking questions the government can't ignore anymore." But we still don't have enough, Angela countered. They're admitting to isolated incidents and rogue operations. They're building a firewall around the leadership. Elijah looked up from his laptop, his young face serious beyond his years. Then we need to make sure there's nowhere left to hide. A truth flood. His plan was audacious, coordinating with journalists, human rights organizations, and watchdog groups around the world for a simultaneous comprehensive release of the entire Omega file, along with all the evidence they'd gathered since. Not just in America, but in 80 countries through every available channel, a global tsunami of truth that would be impossible to contain. The world needs to see everything, Elijah explained. Not just fragments we've released so far. Everything. The operation logs, the funding trails, the victim testimonies. All at once, too big to suppress, too widespread to control. For 2 weeks, they worked around the clock, preparing secure channels, encrypting communications, and organizing the massive data cache. Journalists from international outlets were brought in secretly, given access to verify the information. Before the release, human rights attorneys drafted legal briefs that would be filed in multiple jurisdictions as soon as the documents went public. The night before the planned release, Angela sat alone in the kitchen, recording a video on Andre's camera. Her face showed the strain of recent months, but her eyes burned with quiet determination. "My name is Angela Carter," she began, her voice steady. 3 months ago, government agents raided our home. They tased me, threatened my husband, and attempted to silence a truth that has been buried for 20 years. She paused, gathering strength. "We have endured surveillance, attacks, and attempts on our lives. We have survived, but we refuse to be silent. Tomorrow, the world will see what some have tried to hide. War crimes committed in our name, human experimentation conducted with our tax dollars, and a shadow system that operates beyond accountability or oversight." She leaned closer to the camera, her expression intensifying. "This isn't just our fight. This belongs to every family who lost someone to these secrets, every person detained and experimented on without consent, every citizen who believes that power must answer to truth." The video ended with a simple statement. The truth cannot be tased, bombed, or buried. It was never just an Omega file. It was always a beginning. At precisely 8:02 a.m. Eastern Time the next day, the truth flood began. 80 countries, hundreds of news outlets, thousands of websites, millions of downloads, documents, videos, testimonies, everything released simultaneously in a coordinated digital avalanche. The response was immediate and overwhelming. News channels scrambled to cover the story. Government agencies issued confused, contradictory statements. Iron Wall's stock price plummeted within hours as investors fled. By mid-afternoon, board members of Iron Wall began making public statements distancing themselves from the company's operations. Several announced their immediate resignations, citing poor, recently discovered irregularities. Others offered to cooperate with investigations in exchange for immunity. The cascade of defections reached a tipping point when Lawrence Reed, Iron Wall's chief financial officer for 15 years, gave an explosive interview confessing to facilitating black budgets for classified operations. "I followed orders," Reed said, his face ashen on camera. "But what I saw in those files today, there were lines I never knew we crossed." The FBI raided Iron Wall's headquarters and 3 regional offices by evening. 37 arrests were made within 72 hours, including middle management and operational directors. But the highest levels, including CEO Evan Stroud, remained protected behind walls of lawyers and national security claims. Darnell watched it all unfold from a hotel room in Baltimore, his hand gripping Angela's as they flipped between news channels. Despite the victories, he remained tense, vigilant. "Stroud's still out there," he said quietly. "Men like him don't surrender power willingly." As if confirming his fears, a hotel employee delivered a note that had been left at the front desk. "You've won the battle, Carter. But men like us know there's always another war. E.S." That night, as Angela slept fitfully, Darnell sat by the window watching the street below. A movement in the shadows of the parking garage across the street caught his attention, a figure taking up position with a clear line of sight to their room. Without waking Angela, Darnell slipped out through the hotel's service entrance. Years of military training guided him as he circled behind the parking structure, approaching the figure from behind. The man sensed him too late. As he turned, Darnell struck, not to kill, but to disable. The assassin fell hard, his rifle clattering across the concrete. Darnell stood over him, breathing heavily. "Iron Wall sent you." It wasn't a question. The man's silence was answer enough. "You have a choice now," Darnell said, keeping his voice low and steady. "Testify about who sent you and why, or disappear. And if you choose to disappear, understand that your employers have already sacrificed dozens like you to save themselves. Your loyalty means nothing to them." Fear flickered in the assassin's eyes, not of Darnell, but of the truth in his words. By morning, the man was in FBI custody, providing detailed testimony about Iron Wall's containment protocols, their euphemism for assassination programs targeting whistleblowers and threats. The pressure continued to build. International courts began proceedings based on the war, crimes evidence. Financial investigators froze accounts connected to Iron Wall operations. The company that had operated in shadows for 20 years found itself exposed from all sides. 3 days after the truth flood, President Alexandra Collins was forced to address the scandal in a televised speech from the Oval Office. "The allegations raised by the Omega documents are deeply troubling and contrary to the values we hold as Americans," she stated. "I am ordering a full, independent investigation into these claims, with no restrictions based on classification or national security. Exemptions. Those responsible will be held accountable, regardless of position or influence." She announced the formation of a presidential commission on military contractor oversight, reforms to whistleblower protections, and a reparations program for veterans affected by classified operations. Darnell watched the speech from another hotel room, his expression unreadable. "Pretty words," he murmured. "Let's see if they're backed by action." The next breakthrough came unexpectedly. A mass grave was discovered near the Utah black site location identified in the Omega files. Forensic teams uncovered 16 bodies, all matching descriptions of individuals reported missing over the past decade. DNA testing confirmed their identities, igniting a new wave of public outrage. Families of the victims held vigils outside Iron Wall properties. Veterans staged protests at military recruitment centers. College students organized walkouts demanding transparency about university partnerships with defense contractors. The pressure became too intense to contain. General Covington, whose name appeared throughout the Omega files authorizing operations, was arrested while attempting to board a private jet to a non-extradition country. Evan Stroud was indicted on multiple charges, including conspiracy, illegal detention, and human rights violations. As the legal machinery ground forward, Darnell received an unexpected call from Reggie Monroe, his old comrade who had warned him at the hospital months earlier. "I have something you need," Reggie said cryptically. "The final nail." They met at a truck stop outside Richmond. Reggie, looking older and more worn than when Darnell had last seen him, handed over a weathered leather portfolio. "After I left, the service I needed work," Reggie explained. "Ended up as a janitor at Iron Wall's headquarters, 15 years emptying trash cans and mopping floors, invisible to men like Stroud." A thin smile crossed his face. "But not deaf or blind." Inside the portfolio were handwritten ledgers, physical records of Iron Wall's internal corruption archive. Names, dates, payments, blackmail material, all recorded by hand, never digitized, kept as insurance by a corporate secretary who trusted paper more than computers. "Found these when they told me to clean out a storage room during renovations," Reggie continued. "Been holding on to them, waiting for the right moment." The ledgers provided the final piece of the puzzle, direct evidence linking Stroud, Senator Hayes, and General Covington to decisions they had publicly denied making. There would be no more hiding behind plausible deniability or classification shields. 2 days later, in a packed congressional hearing room, Darnell presented the ledgers. As evidence, the room fell silent as committee members paged through the damning documents. "With this evidence," the committee chair finally announced, We have no choice but to recommend criminal proceedings against all parties implicated in these records. By the end of the month, Ironwall was officially disbanded. General Covington remained in custody awaiting trial. Stroud had been indicted on 87 separate charges. International bodies were discussing war crimes, tribunals for operations documented in the Omega files. The system that had operated in darkness for decades was finally exposed to the light, and it could not survive the exposure. When Darnell and Angela finally returned home, they found their community waiting for them. The entire block had gathered for a cookout, a hand-painted banner stretched across the street. Home of the Truth Tellers. As they moved through the crowd accepting hugs and thanks, Andre approached with his camera. "History needs to record this moment," he said, smiling as he filmed the celebration. That night, after the neighbors had gone home, Elijah made one last discovery. Buried deep in the Omega files metadata was a time-stamped note, written by a younger Darnell during the war. "If you're reading this, it means I survived. But if I didn't, finish what we started." From silence came truth. From truth came legacy. 6 months passed. Spring turned to summer, and the Carter home once again became a center of community activity, but with a new purpose and recognition that hadn't existed before. Angela sat on the porch swing, watching a team of physical therapists set up equipment in their living room. The neural damage from the taser had created ongoing health challenges, but a specialist funded by newly passed legislation, already nicknamed the Carter Act, was pioneering treatments for similar electrical trauma cases. "We're ready for you, Mrs. Carter," called Dr. Freeman, a neurologist who had contacted them after reading about Angela's symptoms. The treatment uses targeted electromagnetic pulses to reset neural pathways disrupted by electrical trauma, he explained, as Angela settled into the treatment chair. "You're our 14th patient, and the results have been extremely promising." The equipment hummed to life. Angela smiled at the irony. Her injury had led to healing not just for her, but potentially for hundreds of others with similar trauma. Pain transformed into progress. It seemed fitting. Across town, Andre stood, on a stage receiving the National Youth Documentary Award for his film Omega: The Truth They Buried. At 17, he was the youngest recipient in the award's history. "This isn't just my story to tell," he said during his acceptance speech, his voice steady despite his nerves. "This belongs to the Carters, to the families of Operation Claystone, to everyone who fought to bring truth into the light." The crowd rose in a standing ovation as Andre acknowledged Darnell and Angela seated in the front row. Afterward, representatives from 3 universities approached him with full scholarship offers. The Pulitzer Committee had also contacted him about his footage being included in their journalism prize consideration. "I'm thinking of studying investigative journalism," Andre told Darnell as they celebrated over dinner that evening. "Or maybe law. Something where I can keep exposing truths that need to be told." Darnell smiled, pride evident in his eyes. "Whatever path you choose, you'll be our future guardian." Officer Sarah Klein's path had also transformed. Her role in exposing Ironwall had initially made her a pariah within her department, but as the full scope of the corruption became clear, perception shifted. She received a citation for moral courage from the Police Benevolent Association and was invited to join a newly formed federal oversight body for intelligence accountability. From writing parking tickets to writing intelligence policy, she joked when she visited the Carters to share her news. Never saw that coming. Elijah, meanwhile, had channeled his technical skills into creating an open-source platform called Project O, a secure system allowing citizens to anonymously report government overreach and corporate misconduct. The system used advanced encryption and distributed storage to protect whistleblowers while ensuring that verified information reached appropriate investigators. "The next Omega file won't need to be buried for 20 years, he explained during the project's launch. "The truth should never have to hide." As summer turned to fall, Congress passed the National Day of Remembrance for Victims of Government Overreach, officially acknowledging the lives lost and damaged by classified operations and human experimentation programs. Angela was invited to speak at the inaugural ceremony in Washington, D.C., standing before a crowd of thousands gathered on the National Mall. "Today we remember both those we failed and those we saved," she said, her voice carrying across the hushed crowd. "We acknowledge a painful chapter in our history, not to reopen wounds, but to ensure they heal properly, with truth, accountability, and a commitment to do better." Back home, Angela transformed part of their backyard into what she called a healing garden, open to the community. Each plant bore a small marker with the name of a veteran or victim remembered, living memorials that would grow stronger with each passing season. "Some people build monuments of stone," she told visitors. "I prefer things that breathe and grow." The garden became a quiet place of reflection for the neighborhood. Sometimes visitors left notes or small tokens. Others simply sat in silence, processing grief or finding peace. Angela welcomed them all, understanding that healing was a community process, not a solitary one. One evening, as sunset painted the garden in golden light, Darnell retreated to his garage workshop. From a hidden compartment beneath his workbench, he removed the original Omega USB drive, the small device that had carried such enormous truth. He considered it for a long moment, turning it over in his weathered hands. He had debated destroying it now that its contents had been made public, erasing this physical reminder of pain and struggle. Instead, he placed it in a small fireproof box, securing it with a combination lock. On the lid, he affixed a simple label. For when history repeats, some burdens needed to be laid down, but some truths needed to be preserved. Not to reopen old wounds, but to prevent new ones. In early winter, a thick cream envelope arrived bearing the presidential seal. Inside was a handwritten letter thanking Darnell and Angela for their extraordinary courage and service to the nation, along with an invitation to the White House. Angela read it twice before setting it aside on the kitchen table. "What do you think?" Darnell considered the question. "I think we've earned the right to choose our battles now, and our moments of peace." She nodded, understanding. "Let's think about it. For now, I just want to breathe." The invitation remained on the table, neither accepted nor declined, a reminder that they now had choices that once seemed impossible. As winter deepened, their lives settled into a new rhythm. Angela's treatment showed promising results, with tremors decreasing and blackouts becoming rare. Darnell continued mentoring at the rec center, but now also spoke occasionally at universities about ethics in military operations and the importance of moral courage. Their story had become part of a larger narrative, one about accountability, justice, and the power of truth to overcome even the most entrenched systems of secrecy. One crisp December afternoon, Angela stood at the kitchen window watching snow begin to fall, creating a blanket of pristine white over her healing garden. The plants were dormant now, resting before spring's renewal. "It's beautiful," Darnell said, joining her at the window and wrapping an arm around her waist. "It is," she agreed, "and it will be even more beautiful when everything blooms again." A knock at the door interrupted their moment of peace. Angela opened it to find a young boy of about 10 standing on their porch, clutching a notebook and looking nervous but determined. "Are you Mrs. Carter?" he asked, his breath visible in the cold air. "I am," Angela smiled. "I'm doing a school project on heroes," the boy explained, his words tumbling out in a rush. "My mom said I should talk to you. She said you and Mr. Carter stood up when others wouldn't, and that's what real heroes do." Angela turned to find Darnell standing behind her, his expression softening as he met the boy's earnest gaze. They exchanged a look, one that contained 20 years of secrets, months of danger, and the unexpected peace they'd found on the other side of truth. Then they smiled and invited him in. As Angela prepared hot chocolate and Darnell pulled up a chair for their young visitor, the snow continued to fall outside, covering the past and preparing the ground for new growth to come. Truth, like seasons, had its cycles: buried seeds, difficult growth, necessary harvest, and finally, rest before renewal. They had completed one such cycle, changing the landscape forever. What would grow next remained to be seen, but the ground had been prepared, and the seeds of change had been planted. The story of the Omega File had ended, but its legacy, like the healing garden waiting beneath the snow, was just beginning to take root. What would you risk to expose a truth that powerful forces had buried for decades? Like and subscribe for more stories of ordinary people who, when pushed to their limits, reveal extraordinary courage that changes the world.